In the village square on a market day, amidst the hum of vendors and shoppers, there was an old woman selling tea. Her stall sat in a quiet corner near the well where women gathered to collect water and gossip. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh vegetables. A young mother with a crying baby approached her stall late in the afternoon when most people had started heading home. The child was fussing, clearly tired from being carried around all day. The woman looked at the tea with longing, but she hesitated, knowing how little money she had left after buying milk and bread that morning. The old woman watched her for a moment before speaking in a gentle voice, "You look like you need something to calm your baby." The young mother gave a small smile of gratitude. "I do. But it's been hard today." "Come," the old woman said, reaching into her kettle and pouring 2 cups of steaming tea. She offered one to the young mother. Hesitantly, the woman accepted the cup. The steam from the hot liquid rose in wisps as she brought the cup to her lips. The baby quieted almost instantly upon hearing the soothing sound of sipping tea. "Thank you," the young mother said softly, cradling the child more securely. She took a sip and closed her eyes briefly at the warmth spreading through her chest. "This is good." The old woman smiled without looking up from her kettle. "Sit down here for a bit if you like." The crowd's thinning now. The young mother sat on an overturned crate beside the stall, leaning against it to let herself relax a little more as she sipped her tea slowly. Her baby nestled into her shoulder and soon fell asleep. Outside their quiet space, life continued around them. People walked by with bags of groceries or stopped to exchange words over baskets of apples and pears. But in that small corner, the world slowed down, held still. After some time passed, the young mother looked at the tea left in her cup, now cool but still fragrant. "I've never had a day like this before," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. The old woman nodded, pouring another cup and setting it next to hers. There was no need for words. Both women knew they were just 2 people sharing the quiet moment that stretched between them. When the young mother left with her now sleeping baby cradled in a blanket, she stepped outside into the growing dusk where other mothers prepared dinner under lamplight. She walked down the path towards home, the cool evening air wrapping around her like an old friend. The old woman watched her go, then turned back to her stall and poured herself one last cup of tea for the day's end. As she sat there alone with the kettle's warm glow and the faint echo of a baby's contented sighs, she looked up at the darkening sky where stars began to twinkle through clouds. And as the stars slowly came out, the well in the center of the square continued its steady drip-drip sound from the water line.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The lantern beside the well cast a soft glow, flickering slightly in the evening breeze. Winter's late afternoon found Hannah in her small garden weeding under pale light.
Late afternoon found Hannah in her small garden, weeding under the pale light of winter. She moved slowly, pausing to smell each flower before pulling out the weeds that crowded them. Her hands were steady, though they showed the wear of many seasons. A knock at the door startled her from her task. Through the window, she saw a man standing there, his shoulders hunched against the chill. He wore no coat and had a basket slung over one arm. She opened it to find an old beekeeper with wild hair and a quiet face. "May I help you?" Hannah asked, stepping back to let him in. His eyes wandered about as if searching for something familiar, yet he seemed to avoid meeting hers. "I have bees," the man began softly, holding out his basket. Inside was a small wooden hive wrapped in cloth. "I cannot care for them anymore." Hannah nodded. She knew of his wife's death last year and how it had left him listless. His bees, once a joy to tend, now seemed an unbearable burden. "Bring them here," she suggested, knowing her garden was well suited for the little creatures. The beekeeper's eyes shifted again, but this time there was something in their reflection, recognition, or gratitude. She didn't know. Together, they carried the hive to a sunny corner of Hannah's plot where marigolds and verbena thrived. They worked quietly, laying down old newspapers for the hive and arranging pots around it to shield from winds. When done, there was no lingering talk, only the sound of bees awakening in their new home. As they stood back to survey their work, a cold wind blew through the garden. Leaves stirred on branches overhead and then fell in silence around them. The man's gaze settled on Hannah for a moment before drifting away again. She handed him a cup of tea from her kitchen. Its steam rose gently between them as he drank it down without looking at her. His hands trembled slightly, but she saw no shame there, only fatigue and the weight of loss. When he left, his steps were lighter than when he arrived. Hannah watched until he disappeared around the corner of her home. She then turned to look back at the hive nestled in her garden, surrounded by blooms. The bees inside hummed a low thrum that filled the air with a sense of renewal. Closing the door softly behind her, she took up her weeding again, the small act returning to normalcy and peace. Her hands found their rhythm once more amidst the quiet life of plants and insects around her.
The bees' hum grew louder as if they were singing to the setting sun. A wooden bridge over a small stream in early morning light.
A wooden bridge over a small stream in early morning light. Water rushes below, clear and cold. A woman approaches from upstream, carrying a basket full of green vegetables. She's middle-aged with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. No hurry in her step. At the midpoint of the bridge stands an elderly man, shoulders hunched, hands gripping the wooden railings for support. He looks frail against the morning light, his clothes worn and patched. He stares down at the rushing water as if lost in thought. The woman notices him immediately. She pauses mid-step but keeps moving forward without hesitation. Arrives next to him and sets down her basket on the bridge's side, closer to where he stands. The man doesn't acknowledge her presence right away. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asks softly after a moment of silence. The man looks up at her, surprised. His eyes are tired but kind. "No," he says with a slight smile. "Just watching the water." She nods, understanding. Picks up an onion from her basket and starts peeling it slowly, not looking directly at him but aware of his presence beside her. "Why do you peel an onion here?" he asks after a while, voice curious rather than critical. "Preparing for supper," she answers without stopping her work. "But I like the way the smell travels through the air." They stand there in companionable silence for what feels like a long time, listening to the stream and watching each other occasionally. The man's gaze returns often to the water below but now with less intensity. "Are you okay?" she finally asks again, her voice softer than before. He nods slowly, more deeply now. "I was thinking about my son who left for the city. It's been hard." "I know," she says simply. Holds out a small piece of cloth she's just torn off the onion skin and hands it to him as if offering something precious but not valuable. "Thank you," he murmurs, taking it carefully between fingers that are rough from years of work under the sun and rain. She smiles gently, turns back to her basket. Starts packing things away neatly one by one. The man watches her for a moment longer before speaking again. "You're kind," he says softly. "Everyone needs help sometimes," she replies without looking at him. Finishes folding everything neatly into her basket, ties it securely. Picks up the wrapped piece of cloth and tucks it gently into the bundle alongside vegetables. He nods slowly, a small smile playing on his lips as if remembering something pleasant from long ago or far away. They walk silently towards opposite ends of the bridge once she's done, respecting each other's space but aware they've shared something meaningful in passing. As he walks back down towards town, she watches him for another minute, her heart strangely lighter after their brief encounter on the wooden bridge over the small stream. As if a small weight has been lifted between them by nothing more than shared presence and quiet care. A leaf falls gently from a nearby tree and settles in the rushing water below them as they part ways, carried away downstream towards an uncertain future but with less worry now for both of them.
A leaf turned somersaults in the air, landing softly on the water's surface before drifting away. A meadow above a sleeping town where she sat on a weathered bench under whispers of autumn.
A meadow above a sleeping town was where she often came to sit and watch the stars. Tonight, the air carried whispers of autumn, and a single lantern cast a soft glow near an old oak tree where she sat on a weathered bench. A salt merchant appeared from the path below, laden with baskets. "May I join you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, eyeing his heavy load. He set down 2 full baskets next to the bench and leaned against them. The air was still, except for an owl's hoot far away. "I'm taking this salt down to the village," he explained without looking at her. "There are those who would go without if not for me." She picked up a piece of driftwood from beside the bench, tracing circles in the dust. "The way back is long," she said softly. "Too true," he replied, shifting his weight slightly as he looked out over the town's rooftops, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. "I've been on this road for years." She nodded and let her gaze follow his across the quiet landscape below them. After a while, the silence began to feel less like absence than presence. "I'm going home soon," he said after several minutes had passed. "To your wife?" she asked. He chuckled softly but did not look at her. "No wife. Just a small house." "What then?" "A place for my things," he admitted, the slightest hint of melancholy in his voice. She set down the driftwood and turned to face him fully. Her eyes held something unreadable but kind. "There's no hurry," she said, her tone gentle yet firm. "Perhaps there is always a better time." He met her gaze then, seeing more than words could express. "Thank you," he murmured. She smiled briefly before looking back out to the town below them once again. As the first light of dawn began to touch the sky's edge, she stood and held out her hand. "For luck on your journey." He took it without speaking, holding hers for just a moment longer than necessary as they shared that quiet between day and night. She released him then and stepped back toward the path. "Goodbye," he said softly. She turned to watch him for a few moments before heading down into the town herself. As she walked away, his hand remained suspended in midair for an instant, then slowly fell back to rest at his side. The lantern's glow dimmed as the first light of dawn grew stronger, casting long shadows from the trees and the old oak bench where they had sat.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. By the edge of the forest stood an old gate half covered in ivy at dusk.
By the edge of the forest stood an old gate half covered in ivy. A woman with a heavy shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a small child sleeping soundly on her back approached it one cool evening. She paused before the gate, fingers tracing the weathered wood. The gate opened inward suddenly, creaking softly as if inviting her entry. An old man stepped through, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked up at her from behind round spectacles and smiled, nodding without speaking. She returned the gesture with a slight bow of her head and pushed the gate closed again gently. He led her down a narrow path that wound between tall trees where sunlight filtered through leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the mossy ground. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and pine needles. They reached an open area where old furniture sat quietly under more trees. The woman set her child down carefully in the center of a faded rug. Her eyes never left him as she watched his slumbering form, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket protectively. The man went to a small table nearby and began arranging teacups, and a kettle over an open flame. Steam curled up into the air. The woman looked on from where she stood, but made no move to join him or help with anything. When the water boiled, he poured it into the cups without a word, offering one of them across to her once done. She took the cup slowly and sipped at its warmth, watching over her sleeping child, as if expecting something could awaken him any time now. The man sat next to her after setting his own cup down. He spoke in a soft voice, telling her about the forest during winter when snow covered everything, making it look like another world entirely. She listened, but didn't respond much beyond nodding once or twice. After what seemed a long time, the woman finally stood up and picked her child back into her arms. The man rose too, returning to his task of cleaning away their tea set quietly. He handed her one last thing, a small wooden figurine he'd carved, smooth and polished from years of holding it, and she took it, fingers closing around its cool surface. Without any more conversation needed between them, they both returned to where the path met the gate. The woman left first through the opening, turning back just before the hinges closed. She smiled at him once more, briefly, then was gone out into the evening. The old man watched her go until she disappeared from sight entirely behind the tree line. He looked down at the empty space on his side of the table where her cup had been and picked up the rag he'd left there earlier to wipe it clean again for next time someone came this way. His fingers moved deliberately, carefully. The sound of a twig snapping in the distance broke the quietude around them, the only other indication that anything else existed outside this moment. He waited a few more minutes before closing and locking the gate behind him as well, returning to his home for the night under the rising moonlight.
The gate's lock clicked softly, echoing in the sudden silence. The air grew cool and still as if listening to its own end. We close the door now. Until tomorrow.